Yeah, I lost my shit. I'm not really proud of it, but it happened, and I'm gonna tell you the story. So the backstory is, we're looking for a media blaster on the 58, and my regular media blast company that I go to, their actual blaster had a heart attack, so we were put out like 4 weeks, and we were wanting to do it faster. So I ended up looking for a company locally. I'm not going to say the company's name because I feel like, honestly, I don't want to slander them, and I don't want to get into all that as far as slandering them, but I'll tell you what happened. What's good, y'all? Just a little update on the 58 Impala. The car is at the blaster, so I haven't been really producing any content recently. I'm looking for my water. I was in the garage earlier, so here I go looking for water. Water, where are you? It's freaking 103 today. And trying to film and unlock shit at the same time is not the ticket. So that means I probably left it in the car and I gotta go. So we're on the way to go check out the 58 that I am working on. If you don't know, now you know. I'm building a 58 convertible, lowrider on 13s. Gonna be sick. So we're on the way to go check that out, and gonna go see what the status is. I guess apparently they found some rust, and so we gotta see to what extent. He wants to make sure that he's gotten far enough around the rust, and then I'll go and I'll replace all that. But anyways, that's where we're going right now. So we'll see what the extent of the damage is on that 58. Hopefully not too bad. It looked good when I went over there on Friday. They were just starting though. And then I got a call from the owner of the company, and he's like, hey, I want you to come and look at this thing. That's always a bad sign. Sometimes freaking no news is good news, for real, when it comes to these old schools. All right, we're on our way. Boy, it is freaking, it's hot. Good thing I got AC in this motherfucker. I may drive a hoopty, but that shit got AC at least, and that shit is cold. Ooh, it is freaking 103 out there, and it is hot. And it's a dry heat, and yesterday was like a low-key moist heat. It doesn't know what it wants to be right now, but the hoopty's got AC, fully charged, and it's nice and cool. So before I finish the story, quick update. The frame is stripped, got that done. The suspension is all out, that's done. All the bushings are out of the suspension, so we can get those things powder coated. All the parts that are going to be powder coated are separated, itemized, and we scraped the rest of the undercoating off this project so that we can get the rest of it blasted and powder coated or powder primered. So overall, I'm pretty happy with the progress on the car. It's moving along pretty good. I'm to the hard part now. I'm doing these videos and editing them as I have time. So I'm a little ahead of you guys, and I have started metal work already, and we are getting to the hard part. I'm hand making some of these parts, some of the sheet metal parts. In particular, I had to do a brace that ties the right rocker, cowl, and floor pan and A-pillar all together, and I had to make that by hand, so that took me a while. And I am onto sheet metal repair on this car. You can see right here behind me. but it takes time to edit these videos. I can only bring you so much at a time because I have a lot of footage, but stay tuned if you want to see the process and the outcome, because I plan on doing the rest of the build and bringing you the rest of the build from start to finish. So we ended up taking the car to a company locally that I found on Yelp. They had some decent reviews, and when I called the owner, he was all about it. He was telling me that basically he could do the job, that he's done it a bunch of times before. And so I trusted him. I took him the car. I hadn't had a lot of experience with cars with a bunch of undercoating like the 58 had. So with that being said, when we took the car to the owner of the shop, he looked at the car and I'm like, hey, this thing has a bunch of undercoating on it. And he's like, oh, no problem, it's underneath, so no big deal, they could take it off. Well, long story short, the car sat there for a couple weeks, which was pretty annoying because I kind of was twiddling my thumbs. I didn't have the car. I had taken the frame apart, and so long story short, I took about a week off because I didn't have the car. And if I would have known that the undercoating was going to be an issue, then I would have just went ahead and heated up the undercoating on my own and scraped it off. So long story short, about a week and a half, I go by the shop and he's nowhere to be found. His workers are there, and they have about 3/4 of the blasting on the car, on the actual body itself that's on the rotisserie done. And then they're like, hey, I don't know if you want to like keep going on this, because basically like the undercoating and all the seam sealer they put on this thing is hard to get off. So I don't know how good you want it. And I'm like, we want it all stripped. So like, anyways, like we want it all stripped, so whatever it takes to get it done. You know, I thought maybe a couple more hours, a few more hours, maybe even 4. So he originally quoted us like 5 to 8 hours for the whole job, mind you, not just the body. So by the time he called me, he's like, you know, I'm already like 9 hours in it. And then I'm like, well, the car's already like stripped on the outside. Like, you guys are basically just doing the floor now. Like, if I take it, that means I got to put my hands all over it, get grease all over it. You're gonna have to bring it back, like, because when you touch it with the oil on your skin, it oxidizes the metal, obviously. So I'm like, okay, well, what's it gonna run just to like, or how much extra is it gonna be, you know, just to like basically for you guys to scrape the rest of the undercoating on the inner wheel wells. There was some on the inside of the quarter panels, on the inside of the trunk. There was some underneath. He was like, oh, well, you know, I got 11 hours in it now, you know, it'll probably be 4 more hours or something like that. I don't know. He was pretty wishy-washy on the whole thing. So I'm like, okay, here's my thing. Like, if you do this all the time and I told you there was undercoating underneath, you know, you should have told me like, hey, like, this is going to cost you extra amount if you don't go and like scrape the undercoating, because I just pressure washed it and acid washed it. So me not thinking about that and not really dealing with like the amount of undercoating this car had, because they were trying to hide all the shoddy metalwork that they did previously. So they did put a lot of undercoating. Granted, like on some areas it was like, I want to say maybe 3/16 of an inch thick, if not a half an inch. So I get that it was a lot of work, but if your blaster is just sitting there blowing media at it, and you're basically telling me now it's going to cost extra amount of dollars, like, why didn't you just tell me from the beginning, hey, like, this thing has undercoating on it, like, you need to take it and scrape it all off? Because the next guy that we ended up taking it to, because I ended up picking the car up like halfway done, ended up telling me like, hey, yeah, if you would have brought this to me, I would have told you, hey, like you need to take this and scrape all the undercoating off first with some heat, and then I'll take it and then I'll blast it, because it's a lot more work with the undercoating on there, and I'm gonna have to charge you. So he's charging us $165 an hour. So anyways, long story short, he ends up like trying to double charge us. Not only that, but he calls me one day on like a Friday, this like on an actual Wednesday, and tells me like, hey, mind you, we dropped off like almost $1,500, and the whole job was supposed to be like $3,000. So he tells me like, hey, bring me another check for $2,970. And I'm like, what? Like, what do you mean $2,970? So when you pick up the car, bring me a check for $2,970. I'm like, well, we're gonna have to figure this out. So I called him like on a Friday, I think it was. Well, actually, he called me on that Friday because we were supposed to pick up the car. This is like 3 weeks or like a month later. He calls me like on a Friday, you know. So anyways, we go over there, look at the car. Back up. So we go look at the car, me and the owner of the car go look at the car, and he's like, you know, we're like, how much you got in it? Like, I got 11 hours in it. My guy's got, then we'll probably have to put another 4. And then, so long story short, he's like all over the place, all over the map with the hours. So then by the time that we end up like going to pick up the car, it's like, it went from like 11 to 16 to 19 hours. And then like he couldn't even, like he did some math like on the back of like the invoice that he showed me, and then I'm just like, what the hell? Like, I felt responsible because I contracted the guy, I talked to him, I was the middleman, so I felt responsible for you know, the whole thing. So when we go to pick up the car, long story short, we go to pick up the car, and we're like, okay, what do we owe you, or what's the damages going to be? Because so we go in his office. So prior to us picking up the car, I call him and I'm like, hey, just stop what you're doing right now. I had found somebody else to do the car that was reputable, that I called around and asked, and some people told me, hey, go to this guy, you know, he can do the job and he's not crazy expensive. So I tell him, hey, just stop, let's figure out where we're at, and before we go any further, because you know, this is like a lot of money right now. This is astronomical. This is getting crazy. So he's like, oh, I knew you guys were gonna complain and blah blah blah. And I'm like, okay, whatever. I'm not even gonna get into it with them right now. Whatever. So when we go in to pick up the job, we go in to pick up the car, and he's like, oh, it's you guys, and just like, the car's like literally like coated. It's in the dark, mind you, like doesn't pull it out, doesn't turn the lights on to be like, you know, they have a pretty big size shop, probably like about 7,000 6,000 square feet. The car's sitting in the dark and like doesn't show us anything. It's just like basically, so me and the owner like under the assumption that we're gonna negotiate a deal, because basically he wants like $2,970, you know. And we're like, I'm just like telling the owner, like, let's just not even pay him. Like, let's just call the police and just get this car out of here. I was that pissed off because he was trying to charge us double for half the work, basically. So anyways, we get there and I'm just like, hey, well, you know, like, let's figure this out. And he's like, well, do you have the other parts? You know, because I took like the fenders and stuff and ended up scraping them at the shop. And because a lot of the stuff he didn't get to, I'm like, let me just take this stuff and like scrape all the undercoating off, and then we'll bring it back. But at the end of the day, whenever we started doing it, I'm just like, he's already getting crazy with the price. Like, let me just find somebody else to do this job. So he's like, did you bring the parts back? And I'm like, no, we're just gonna pick up everything. Like, just tell us what we owe you for now, and then we'll go from there. You know. So he's like, well, you know, that was a lot of work, and I got 19 hours and whatever. And then, so I'm like, well, look, I'm like, you quoted us, like, what we signed for was 8 to 5 hours, which was like, you know, I don't remember what the math was, but it was like way less than he actually was trying to charge us for. So, and he's like, so then he gets all pissed off, and he's like, well, you're stuck on that 8 to 5 hours, and that's way before. And I'm like, well, that's what you freaking quoted us. So he's like, he's like, you're starting to piss me off. And I'm like, I'm not trying to piss you off. I'm just telling you that's what you quoted us. You know, here I go, here's my thing. I go, if you seen the car, I told you that there was undercoating on it. You should have said something like from the beginning. And he's like, you know what? Like, you're starting to fucking piss me off. Get the fuck out of my shop. And I'm like, all right, that's fine. I'm like, being that it's not my car, if it would have been my car, I was like, you know what? That's fine. I'll just start grabbing the shit. And he's like, the fuck you will. Like, you ain't grabbing nothing out of my shop, like, until you guys pay me. And I'm like, you know what? Like, honestly, I go, why don't we just call the cops? I go, they can come down. Like, we can figure all this out. He's like, fuck. I'll call the cops. I'll call them right now. I'm like, well, call them then. So he's like, you know what? Get the F out of my shop. Like, so the owner's like, just chill, you know, like, don't cause a big thing. Like, the owner of the car, you know, my buddy, he's like, just like, let it go, basically. So I'm like, you know what? Fine. Fuck it. I'm going to go out of the shop. I'm just leaving. So he gets behind me. And he like gets in my face. He's like, oh, you fucking punk. And I'm like, okay. I'm a punk now, whatever. That's cool. Whatever. So I'll just fucking leave. Like, before I do something that basically is gonna like get us in trouble, or get like the owner in trouble, or cause like some other drama, right? So I start to leave or whatever. He follows me out, and then they lock the door because they have like a gate, which I see why, because like, now that I'm looking at the reviews on Yelp, you know, I started looking more. Like, apparently he does this quite a bit. And I even talked to one of his workers, and he's like, I wish the owner would tell people up front, like, what this is going to cost. And I even asked him, I'm like, so, you know, if we leave the car here and like do the rest of the pieces with you, like, what's it going to cost us? You know what I'm saying? Like, to do this. And he's like, oh, he's like, $6,000. I'm like, are you freaking kidding me? $6,000 to strip a car and powder prime it? You're tripping. Like, I've done this so many times with other people, and like, granted, that was like years ago, but like, it's only ever cost me like $2,500 to do a complete car, and I've done like 3 cars before. So I'm like, you're freaking tripping. Like, there's no way it costs $6,000 to strip down a car and powder prime it. That's crazy. So anyways, I leave the shop or whatever, right? And so then my buddy and him negotiated a deal, which was a lot less, which I need to learn how to do that, because I ended up just getting pissed off and like started running my mouth, and we got into it. I got into it with the guy, you know, so he was calm. He negotiated a pretty decent deal, which not decent to me, because like, it ended up costing us $250 over the original price that he said for the whole job, and we only ended up getting the body primered. So anyways, so I go out of the shop. I tell, his son was with us, I tell him, go in there and you know, check on your dad. I go, there's 2 guys in there. So he had his other buddy with him, and I'm like, go in there and check on your dad and make sure he's cool, because like, he was all hostile when I left, right? Not my buddy, but like the owner of the shop. So I'm outside, I'm waiting. Finally they come out, and then I'm like, so then like, he opens the gate, and then I'm like, is everything cool? Can we grab the stuff? Can we grab the parts? He's like, yeah. So I start to walk in. The owner's standing on a pallet where all the parts are, or like near it, and I'm like, I'm gonna grab the stuff, like, and I kind of said it with an attitude, and he's like, oh, are you gonna play nice now? And I freaking lost my shit. That's when I lost my shit right there. And I freaking got up in his face, and I'm like, you know what? You're fucking lucky that this is not my car, for one, and 2, that I'm not like I used to be, because I would fucking beat your ass for calling me a punk. Nobody calls me a punk and gets away with it. And then he like bows up and like gets in my face. He's like, oh, I'm not backing down. I go, I'm not backing down either. I'm like, and he's like, oh, I'm a crazy Portuguese or something like that. And I'm just like, I don't give a fuck what you are. I'm telling you right now. I go, I'll beat your fucking ass. So anyways, he's like, we're both face to face, and then his buddy comes over, and he's like, oh, you know, you guys don't want to get in trouble, like, chill out, you know, whatever. And then, so I'm like, yeah, I'm like, that's what I thought. I go, that's what I thought. I go, I'm a punk, right? So then, like, I'm still like up in his face, and then, so basically, like, I'm like, you know what, fuck it, I'm grabbing the parts. He's like, get out of my shop, don't touch none of the parts. I'm like, fucking stop me. I'm like, stop me. I go, do something. I go, why don't you do something? You know, stop me. I go, why don't you fucking stop me? Stop me from getting the parts. And then I grab a part, and then I get back in his face. So then he's like, call 911. Which was fun. I could not hold it in. I just started busting up. I started laughing. I even mocked him. I'm like, call 911. And oh man, I was pissed. Like I try not to get like that upset anymore about anything, you know, like not to let people disturb my peace like that. But I was visibly, like, not for the rest of the day, probably for about another 2 hours, I was visibly pissed off. I wanted to beat his ass so bad because of the way he was trying to talk to me, and like the way he tried to act towards me, basically attack me personally when I was just trying to negotiate a deal with them, or basically trying to get him to understand that, like, you quoted us this price and now you're trying to like double it or triple it or quadruple it. You know what I'm saying? Actually double it, because, you know, 3,000 to 6,000, it's just crazy, like, to me. But I get it, like, in his mind, and this is why I don't want to like slander him or whatever. In his mind, he was probably like, you know, that's what it costs, because, you know, back when I ran my shop, you know, and it's just basically miscommunication. I got into situations before where, like, I didn't fully communicate, and that was my bad. So I understand, like, I didn't fully communicate what the job wasn't going to entail, and then I get into the job, and it's sometimes, a lot of times actually, when you're doing this type of work, custom work, one-off stuff, you don't realize until you get into the job, like, that you know, it's extra amount or more of work. A lot of times I'd end up eating it, but then sometimes I'd be like, hey, like, I need X amount more dollars, or I'd call the customer up, and, you know, then they'd be upset as well. So I get it. But the thing was like, the way he handled business and the way he talked was what upset me, I think.